Welcome to Coffee and Geography, where my guests and I geek out about the world and everything on it, discovering that we are all geographers in some way, shape or form. I'm your host, Kit, and my pronouns are they, them or she, her. So settle down with a brew, hit that subscribe or follow button, and enjoy the listen. Hello everybody, and welcome back to Coffee and Geography. This is going to be a fantastic discussion. I always say, I always have chats with my guests before we press the record button, and we've been going now for almost 20 minutes because I actually have a connection to the location that this person is at. Hilary Habeck Hunt, how are you? Well, this evening, this afternoon.
Greetings. Hello. Thank you so much for having me. I am absolutely thrilled to be here.
Yeah, and the connection that we have is if I read the first sentence of your bio is that you are a PhD student at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where you are completing a joint degree in geography and environment resources. So that's two connections that we have because, as I've just said, my wife's family is from Wisconsin, and my in-laws met at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And of course, we both did an environmental science degree.
That's right. So plenty of good geographical connections between us already.
Oh my good grief. Yeah. And that's it, folks. We just really spent, and actually we just said we better press record because we're just going off on one.
Better get on with it, yeah.
What a lovely connection to make straight away. Okay, folks. So to finish introducing Hilary then. So before returning to the Academy for a PhD, Hilary spent nearly a decade in environmental conservation nonprofits around the United States, including Oregon, New York, and Michigan. And due to this experience, she identifies both as a practitioner and academic, and her scholarship reflects this hybridity. And we're not teaching, reading, or writing about land conservation and political ecology. And yes, folks, this is the third episode in a row. She nerds out on Tolkien lore and tweets about chronic illness and disability in academia. Another Tolkien fan.
Yeah, I can't even answer for that. We must be spawning or something. 3 in a row.
Our last guest, Jessica Law, mentioned about Tolkien's eco-anxiety.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely.
Which was really interesting. So this is also something that I know you're very, very interested in, because of environmental conservation and with the non-profits you work with. But I'll tell you what, before we talk about the usual things we start to talk about what you're drinking and where you're from and stuff like that, does it make sense to you that Tolkien would have had eco-anxiety?
It does. I think he had a lot of concern and kind of early prescience about what was happening with kind of the mechanization of the countryside and the process. I mean, really that began, centuries before in rural England, obviously. But I think his experience in the war marked him deeply, and his, fear for what machine can do to mankind. And I think that in particular, the Ents, the walking trees, for those who don't have the lingo, they are the perfect kind of anthropomorphized version of a forest that can, defend itself, kind of what all environmental studies majors like us would like to see happening, that the forest could fight back.
Yeah.
So yes, I think that's totally a fair statement.
Yeah. And I have to do this line now. You ready?
I'm ready.
Tree, I am no tree. I am an ant. I may also do my Gollum for you later. We'll see.
Fingers crossed on that one. Let's definitely keep that in, please.
Yeah. But no. So and it's really funny because actually at the Geographic Association conference, which for me had just gone by, but for the listeners was now a couple of weeks ago. One of the sessions we did was about wider reading and extended reading as a geography educator, and now, after talking to yourself, to Jessica, and to Ellie before that, I've realised that actually you've definitely could put Lord of the Rings on a extended reading for a geography educator.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, Christopher Tolkien.
It's so clear to me now.
Yeah, Christopher Tolkien was a cartographer, and both of them shared a really huge passion for maps, cartography, and location, and the relationships of location. I mean, yeah, total fellow nerds of cartography in place.
So, folks, if you're a geographer or an environmentalist or any kind and you haven't read Lord of the Rings yet, you need to do it. You need to do it. Right. So finally, on to the standard things of this podcast. So talking about coffee and geography. So what do you usually drink on a Sunday afternoon? Then Hilary, what have you got with you today?
So it's raining outside, so I have my very special rain cup mug,
Oh, I love it.
which I'm a huge fan of rain. Living in Oregon for several years, I think, just converted me. And I'm drinking peppermint tea, loose leaf peppermint tea. I'm a big believer in loose leaf tea as opposed to tea bags. Yeah, I used to drink coffee, but I think as I've gotten older, I've mellowed out a little bit, and I'm sticking with the herbal teas for now. What about you?
It's funny you say that because so a few episodes ago, listeners will know I talked to Hermione Meow, which was a wonderful discussion, and she said that she told us about how in Chinese culture they always carry a flask of hot water, and then they put things inside it, their herbs, different herbs. She showed, and I do apologize, Hermione, I know you're listening. She showed me these kind of prunes, and she told me what they were in Chinese. I couldn't remember, and some flowers as well. And when I saw her at the conference, because she was there at the conference, she gave me a bag of this stuff.
That's so lovely.
So I am actually, Hermione, if you're listening, I have got with me my flask of hot water, and I've got one of those prunes, which you're going to tell me, shouting at the podcast, the radio, what it is, and those flowers in my flask, and it is absolutely delicious. And I am because I'm an avid tea drinker, but
yes,
I tell you what, Hermione, you've got me hooked on this. So
cheers.
That's what I'm drinking.
That sounds wonderful.
Yeah. And in fact, when Hermione gave me that stuff, I had to go and find a kettle or a hot water dispenser after every session. I was like, I need this flask refilled because I need my
So, yeah, the tea habit.
I'm with you. I'm with you, Hilary. I think I'm coming around. I did drink herbal teas every now and then, but I think it's just so much more soothing. And so, yeah, it's lovely. Right. So Wisconsin then. So you're in Madison, Wisconsin. But I want to say, folks, what you put on your Twitter profile is it Dejop or Dejup? How do you pronounce that?
Yeah, so Dejop is the the area that is currently known as Madison, which is the capital of the state of Wisconsin. And Dejop is the word for the place name in the Ho-Chunk language, which are the people indigenous to and with a continuing presence on this landscape that I inhabit as well.
Yep. So, and this is so in Ho-Chunk. It's in Ho-Chunk, so it is spelled Hooca with a little tilde on the bottom of it, a little tail K, but it's spelled Ho-Chunk. So in Ho-Chunk language, Dejop translates as 4 lakes, named after the deep lakes that define the landscape that provide a high quality of life for all living beings, plant, animal, and in between the periodic ice ages that covered the Dejop in a mile-thick sheet of ice. So what I'll do, folks, that's from Tribal Relations. The University of Wisconsin-Madison's website, actually, under significance and history. So I'll put a link in the description for that for you folks. It's a really interesting read. So Hilary, why, I mean, obviously talking to me personally, you're preaching to converted, but why is it important that us as with a settler background, with a colonization background, that we must recognize these indigenous lands that these places are now occupying? In your opinion, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that knowing place names in the language that evolved in that place is really important, because what could be a more descriptive name than the name that emerged from human experience over millennia on that landscape? I mean, thinking about like the place of the lakes or the 4 lakes, we do have 4 lakes here in Madison, and I believe that Madison is actually named after James Madison, which has nothing to do with Wisconsin. Whereas Dejop is actually a descriptive geographic place name, unlike Madison, which is just a far off bureaucrat president. So
there you go.
Ultimately, it's a better description.
Yep, exactly. And folks, I'm not going to. I haven't practiced the pronunciation of these words, and I do not want to disrespect the indigenous cultures by trying, to trying to pronounce these. But if you go to the website that I just mentioned, it really does give exactly what Hilary's just said, a really good description about what these names actually mean. And it's like, so you've got the indigenous term for the Catfish River, because where the catfish, which is now the Yahara River, the one which is the lakeshore, which is called Where the Person Rests. If the direct translation in English, it's a beautiful, and that's now Lake Mendota. So, but its indigenous name was Where the Person Rests. Great Teepee Lake, which is now Lake Monona. Tall Reed Lake. I wonder why they called that. That's Lake Wabessa. And Hard Maple Grove Lake, which is now Lake Kegonsa. So there you go, folks. That's just exactly what we're talking about. And it reminds me actually, Hilary, of a discussion I had in the first season where we talked about language and how in indigenous languages, it's so much more rich and descriptive. Like they would have a dozen or more word for a tree, but to represent a tree in its different life cycle or its different purposes or its different uses or its situation. And this is why we need to hold on to these things, because we're losing a richness of our connection to the earth otherwise, I feel.
Absolutely. And I think it also comes back to sovereignty and recognizing that using these names is giving power to those names and giving power to the people that use those names, and kind of calling to the land in a way that acknowledges and uplifts the sovereignty of the people who are the kind of rightful owners and dwellers on it. And I think that's very important as well.
Yeah, totally agree. So are you? So you say you're from the Midwest. Is that your background, your heritage? Have you been a settler of this region and then moved and then been to other parts, like you said, Oregon, New York, Michigan? So is this your grounds then?
Yeah, so I'm a settler, descended European American, and so I think I've worked hard to kind of give back to the Midwest, which is where I was raised. I was raised in Michigan,
Okay.
and then I spent time on both coasts, a couple different states on both coasts before returning to Wisconsin, to the other side of Lake Michigan, to do my PhD. So I think of myself as a kind of like a returned Midwesterner. A lot of people leave for the coast and never come back, and I just couldn't be restrained. So I'm here again.
Yeah, actually, shout out to one of my old friends who's from Troy, Michigan, who actually did exactly the same thing, moved out to the coast, and then she's a singer songwriter, and she actually wrote a song about returning to the Midwest, but missing the coast at the same time. So I definitely, that Paul is definitely in popular culture in that respect. So, but the question I like to always ask people, Hilary, is when you've gone about your travels. What was it? It was that Baz Luhrmann song, which was "Ladies and Gentlemen of the Class of '99, wear sunscreen." That was it, and it says, live in California, but leave before it makes you too soft, and live in New York City, but leave before it makes you hard. So, is that true for you? Have you brought back a piece of the West Coast in Oregon back to the Midwest, and have you brought a piece of the East Coast in New York back to the Midwest? Is there anything that's part of your identity now that's manifested within your Midwest identity?
What a great question. I think that's very true of Boz, very well stated. I think that I did live in Oregon for several years, and I think I brought back, like I talked about, my newfound passion for rain. But I think on a more serious note, I do think that the kind of public spiritedness of Oregon was very motivating for me when I was involved in nonprofit work. I really appreciated that. There seems to be kind of like a pitch-in type culture out there. People don't tend to just, like in New York, I really appreciate how people just move and get on with their day, and
Yes.
just, the pace is very quick. And I appreciate how upfront and brusque people are. But I think that there's I do feel like I've brought back the kind of attempt, at least, to bring back that kind of pitch-in culture from Oregon. And I think the Midwest is, very grounded, which I definitely try to be on the grounded side of things. But then I do think in some moments it can really help to bring kind of the East Coast brusqueness, and like, there are moments when applying that is helpful. So I feel like and the Midwest is probably the average of the two. So I feel like I probably ended up where I began anyway.
Yeah, and I feel that's true because my wife's family, who are from Wisconsin, one of my wife's cousins lives in Manhattan, lives in New York City now, and
Yeah.
she definitely embodies the spirit of the East Coast. I mean, the whole family, they love. Oh, I love them to bits. They are characters and everything. But yeah, she really does embody the East Coast, and she definitely brings that back to her whenever we see her in Wisconsin. Bless her. Right. Before we move on, we just want to go back to about Indigenous place as well. So. One thing I'd like to share with folks is something called the native land map. And to find this, folks, I really do strongly recommend you have a little play around with it. It's called native-land.ca. So it's hosted in Canada, but it's been used by academics in consultation with Indigenous peoples to try and map Indigenous lands, territories, languages, and treaties. So I've sent Hilary the link as well to have a little look at. And then if you were to type in, for example, Madison, Wisconsin, you'll see that yes, absolutely, you've got the Ho-Chunk land there, but you've also got these overlapping territories through history. So the Sauk, the Fox, the Kickapoo as well. That's really interesting. So what should we look at? So whereabouts roughly was you in Oregon then Hilary? Let's have a look. Was you
I
Portland
was
or anything near it?
I was near in Eugene for a while, and then Portland.
So let's just go
So either one of
Portland.
those.
So folks, so if we search for Portland, we have 4 overlapping areas that come up. So we have it just goes to show that territory is not, well, you know what it does, Hilary, for me, and I'd like to hear your comment about this. Doesn't it just go to show how inadequate it is for us to stick an arbitrary line for a map?
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, just tell us what we can see just by looking at current day Portland.
So looking at here, we have at least 4 or 5 different nations, territories kind of converging near the Willamette River, just near modern day Portland. And it is amazing to see, they have them kind of in a color gradient in this GIS. And I think it's amazing to see how different this is from like a modern day settler view of the townships or counties is what we use in the US. Like the townships within a county would be slicing up this map, and there'd be no, there's no land held in common, right? There's no overlap. Everything's just administrative boundary, cut and dry, black and white. So it is interesting to look at this and think about what that might mean. And I don't really know what it means, so I would be hesitant to offer a analysis of that. But
it's definitely it's definitely something for learning for myself and people listening as well. What I have not, I can't believe I didn't spot this when I was showing this at the conference the other day. But there is a link just in the key that says, and it says, think critically about this map. And what it does, it takes you to a teacher's guide, which was the most recent version is 2019. And it tells you about, it says the guide discusses the pros and cons of the maps itself, the importance of learning more about colonialism, and provides resources for teachers to learn more. So even the makers of the map understand exactly what you just said, Hilary, is that we have to think about this. It isn't just cut and dry, it does put us in a learning zone as well. So
right.
Yeah. Amazing. But folks, do check that out. I'd say it will change your worldview for the better, honestly. And at the moment they've got Australia on there. They've definitely got, places all around Africa and the Americas. So yeah, and I suppose now that I think about it, maybe not so surprised, but even in Scandinavia, in northern Russia and things like that, of course, there's going to be this kind of similar situation going on there. So yeah, do check that out.
That is cool. Yeah. Very neat.
Right. Okay, let's get back to you personally now. So I really, really want to hear about what you've been up to. So you've put here that you've got an undergraduate degree in Spanish and environmental science, and social work, and your master's in non-profit management. So you say here, when you start to draw the Venn diagram between those four disciplines, it completely makes sense. So yeah, tell us a little about these four aspects: non-profit work, social work, environmental science, and Spanish, and how they just seem to intersect. I'm fascinated.
Yeah. So unfortunately, unlike the UK, in the US, we don't really have geography as a subject in school. It's kind of just lumped under the larger social work, social studies, experience, like in middle school and elementary school. So you'd have like maybe a unit in geography, but really what I remember from geography is just getting quizzed on a map. That's all it was. And then we went straight back to studying like the ancient Greeks. So there was really no interest and acknowledgement in geography as a discipline in the way that we studied like chemistry and physics and biology and math and the languages. Like those were seen as disciplines. And so for me, I don't even think that I realized that geography was a thing that I could do. I thought it was just the map quizzes. And then, so I went all through my undergrad years at the University of Michigan, studying very applied things. So Spanish language, environmental science like you, and social work. So it doesn't get any more applied than those three things. I mean, there's nothing theoretical about those three disciplines. It's all just practicing the skill. And I loved that, and it was great. And then I worked for a couple of years and went back to get a master's degree in nonprofit management, which is kind of like a MBA for nonprofits. So, administrating and doing policy work, that sort of thing. And then after that, I spent several years doing kind of land conservation work at nonprofits. And when I came back this most recent time, there's like a pattern emerging here that I go out and do work, and then I come back to academia, I go out and do work, then I come back and get fresh ideas. I think that might be my pattern so far. But when I started this last time, I started with a PhD in environment and resources at the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies, which is at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And my advisor, Paul Robbins, is actually a geographer. And he slowly really brainwashed me in a wonderful way to become a geographer. And through that process of reading the, geographic theory and thinking geographically about problems and, the kind of approach that he took, I realized, and we had an advising meeting, and I said, Paul, I have to tell you something. I think I'm a geographer. And he was thrilled, and he was like, fantastic, you can do a joint degree, no problem. We'll get all the admin stuff sorted, and then you can get started.
I tell you what, Hilary, we've got geography teachers going, yes, you want to listen to this, because that's exactly what happens when our ex-students come to us and they say, you know what, you were right.
I mean, I really think like we need we need geography in high school and US, because it's just not part of the curriculum. And I wish so much that I'd had that, because I think if I'd realized that there was a way to be qualitative and quantitative and spatial and problem solving and theoretical all at the same time, I wouldn't have needed to have 3 different courses of study in my undergrad. I would have just done geography. And so I think I really see, I just appreciate the discipline so much. And I'm so lucky that I got to, very late in life, but still got to make a home in this discipline.
Yeah. And as I said to you before we started recording, I think that you would have felt so at home at the Geographical Association conference. I know, folks, it sounds like I'm promoting them, I'm a sponsor and all that kind of stuff. No, it's just because that's what I just generally feel. So if I reach down and look at the program, actually, see if I can, I've got all of my stuff from the conference still on the floor here.
We need a little musical interlude, yeah.
Where is it, my precious? Where is it? No, found it. So, I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't cut that bit out. So,
the people need.
So I'll just give you a couple of examples then. So one workshop, sustainable schools. How can geography help achieve school sustainability? Another one here, year 12 students, which is 11th grade really. Year 12 students, epistemological and methodological ideas. Divergent geographers, mudlarks of the Thames foreshore. GI pedagogy curriculum hub. What else? Tectonic teamwork, using social media to extend subject knowledge.
That's amazing.
Thinking critically about climate education. And as I already met, my one reteach, wider geographical reading for the classroom, and one more. Oh yes, the 4 C's, a whole school approach to the climate and nature emergencies. So you know, and that's a geography teachers conference, and yeah, when you say environmental science, social work, non-profit, and I'm thinking, oh yeah, you know, I remember doing that unit with my students about this, and it's where all these things intersect and stuff like that. So we have one of our ex teachers here, who a really good friend of mine, Hannah. Hello, Hannah. Who has moved over to the east coast of the United States, who now teaches over there, and she's like, it's totally different. As you just said, we don't teach. I'm a science teacher here, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
I think geographers here get immediately kind of put into the environmental science or even geology bin, which just it has geo at the beginning, so it must be the same thing.
Oh yeah.
But I think that, I mean, especially, I'm glad to hear that your friend is, you know, bringing the good word of geography to the U.S. But I do feel like that, you know, I was at the AAG, which is our kind of American Geographers Association, or kind of like trade association meeting. I went virtually because of chronic illness, which we'll discuss. But it was really interesting, like seeing there's such an emphasis on higher education and graduate school and all these things. And it's like, that's all well and good. I'm a geography graduate student, but how do we expect people to arrive here if we're not leading them along the way? I mean, I was so fortunate that I just had a geographer for an advisor. Otherwise this wouldn't have happened. So I really think that should be more of an emphasis here.
Yeah. And yeah, I totally agree. And I know folks, if you're still umming and ahhing about being a geographer, it's just like, yes, we're biased, of course, but I've said it so many times, is that geography is an interdisciplinary, intersectional discipline. Like, you cannot take one thread of something without pulling on another. So take plate tectonics, and this blew my mind, Hilary. We were listening to, I think it was my good friend Alistair Hamill was also being on the podcast, and he was saying that yes, of course, you know, we must be aware of weather conditions and weather forecastings during the middle of an eruption. And I thought, yeah, of course that makes sense. You know, if heavy rains come through and they rain through a pyroclastic cloud or ash, you know, they can cause mud flows, lahars. Yeah, of course that. But then what he said blew my mind. He was like, if you get heavy, you know, for example, if heavy rains come on and you've got thin crust and those rains quite heavy, they can actually cause an eruption. And my mind just went, I know this is very, very punny, but mine went, you know.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh my God, I never really thought about that. And yet my speciality was meteorology. And now I think, yeah, you destabilize the soil and then that can cause fractures and it can cause destabilization, of course, and that could take a release of pressure and could cause an eruption. And so you can't think about tectonic processes without thinking about meteorological processes.
Right.
And then of course you've got the human element, the risk factors, why people live there, and then you've got the colonial element, because some people are forced to live there because of history. And it's just like, yeah, that's why it's so beautiful. And like you said with the map, we never stop learning. We have to look at it a bit deeper. It's such a beautiful thing.
There's always another question to ask. Absolutely. Yeah.
Hi folks, a chance for you to recharge your brew, but also a polite prod to remind you that it's so easy to support this podcast. Simply liking, sharing, rating and reviewing means that it will get on more people's radar. Also, there are a few links down in the description which may be of mutual benefit. Please do check them out. So you've defended your PhD and you become Dr. Hilary. What would you say is the bit of your PhD which you really can't wait to present to, when you're presenting them and you're defending it? So give us a very short spiel of a highlight of what you're doing at the moment.
Yes, absolutely. So I couldn't leave my past in environmental nonprofits and land conservation behind. So that's a big part of my PhD. My dissertation explores, kind of broadly. Here's a, big picture
Sure.
setting for you. It explores the boundaries and the practices of non-capitalist or more than capitalist land conservation. So thinking about protected areas in a more expansive way than just the traditional kind of like buy and sell for conservation. And I would say that my work is very much inspired by Julie Graham and Katherine Gibson, who are amazing feminist economic geographers. And they wrote together as J.K. Gibson Graham. Folks might know them from that name. And kind of thinking about the more than capitalisms, the beyond capitalisms, the capitalism ands. And I think that kind of alternative economies piece is a big part of my work, as well as just generally, I do mixed methods research. So I do some GIS and remote sensing, not very skillfully. I do ethnographic kind of semi-structured interviews and surveys as well. So some quantitative stuff in there. So I'm a very mixed methods person studying a interdisciplinary question. So there's plenty to muddy the waters but also plenty of ways for people with different approaches to engage with it.
Yeah, and when that stuff gets published, I'm already envisaging so many different ways of people stemming from that. And that sounds really, really exciting, and I'm very excited to be following like how that goes. And I'll look forward to seeing those tweets of yours here who say I'm defending my PhD, because I want to have a load more to read. So that's amazing.
Thank you. That's lovely.
I wrote. I'll send you the link as well, and I might, if people are interested, I'll put it in the description as well. I actually wrote an article for a geography teaching website called "Can't See the Wood for the Trees: Rethinking Rainforest Sustainability," because I was I'm so fed up of this whole classic capitalist Eurocentric model of sustainability. And I went on it, and the article was a bit of I didn't manage to get it published actually in student facing articles, journals, because it was too meta apparently. So but a friend of mine says we'll put it on our website, Kit, because it really is so I'll put that on there, folks. Well, and it really is a thought experiment. It's like, how would you, that classic Venn diagram of environmental, social, and economic. How we know what that looks like traditionally, and they've got to be balanced to be sustainable. All that nonsense,
right.
And then challenging that concept. So I'd love to hear your critique of it. And see where I could go forward with that. That would be amazing. You mentioned about disability and chronic illness. And I love that you are very happy to talk about that and be visible with that. So yeah, I really don't know what question to start with, but basically, so tell us a little bit about how, what it is. And you mentioned about, sometimes you might have to do things virtually because of it, and how you manage it, and and how it defines you as a person, how you I wouldn't say overcome it, because I think that's I have my own, I'm neurodivergent. I wouldn't say overcoming it, that degenerates who I am as a person. How do you make it a part of yourself, and how do you thrive through it?
Yeah, exactly. I think so. I wasn't born with chronic illness and disability. It kind of happened in the last 5 years. It's kind of like a slow slope, I would say, kind of like experiencing it, like rolling faster and faster, realizing what was happening. So it's been, I think for me, because prior to becoming disabled and sick, I was a very outdoorsy person. We chatted a little bit at the beginning about being camp counselors and
Yeah.
putting up tents, building fires, hiking, blah, 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 like all these like, pursuits, most of which are somewhat out of reach for me at this point.
Right.
And I think that it was a real journey around redefining my relationship with the outdoors, but also with land and space, thinking geographically. I mean, I used to belong kind of almost anywhere outdoors. And as that changed, those sort of reflections got me thinking about space and my relationship more theoretically and more geographically. And I think that, although I can't cover ground physically like I used to, I still, can think about it and theorize about it and ask people about it and even remotely sense land cover, and have different ways of engaging with it, as opposed to the traditional kind of outdoorsy person.
Yeah.
And I think within academia, so part of the reason I left the environmental conservation industry was because it wasn't possible to do my work while being sick. So I spent as much time indoors writing grants as I could, and then there were days when I just had to be out in the field, and often those days coincided with pretty severe symptoms, and that got kind of scary after a while. And so I realized I'd much rather be indoors with books,
All right. Yes. Yeah.
or at least have the option to be indoors with books whenever I need to be. And so I think that for me, um, I it's made me more of a theoretical person and more of a generative person, thinking about like my scholarship, as opposed to someone who's kind of like out there making things happen and like kind of reacting and a doer, a pusher. So I appreciate it for the way that it's forced me to reflect, but I also think there are really serious systemic barriers to being
Yes.
disabled and chronically ill, especially as a graduate student. The really low salaries that TAs, I'm a teaching assistant,
Mm.
get, are often barely enough to cover the expensive medical care,
Yeah.
especially here where
Yeah.
we have almost everything's out of pocket. And I think also finding safe housing that will meet your needs, whatever those are, for breathing, for air conditioning, for et cetera,
Mm.
stairs, blah blah blah, all of those things are really hard on a limited budget. So a lot of chronically ill people don't come into academia because the process of going through kind of the impoverishment and the low income of being a graduate student is prohibitive.
Yeah.
So a lot of abled and healthy people, I would say, are able to continue. And another thing that has been interesting for me to negotiate is kind of I think the very masculinist idea of being out in the field,
Mm.
meaning that you have to be like a male person standing atop like a hill, like having climbed it and understanding it perfectly,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
That's what people think about when they talk about like mapping, exploring geography, right? And it's like, well, actually, like a lot of my interviews will be held like just sitting on people's porches or like over Zoom, or it's not. And I think that's kind of like a very feminist challenge to the discipline. And I appreciate the fact that the disability justice framework has, that thinking and all of the dreaming that's been done in disability justice has created that space for me. But I also acknowledge that, I'm very privileged in so many ways. I mean, I'm white, I'm settler, I'm straight, I'm cis.
Mm.
All these things are, ways that I am able to conform and, go through academia more easily. So just because I'm disabled, I'm, much more privileged than I am marginalized. And so I think I also want to acknowledge that, because I want to make sure that people understand that that's a big part of it as well.
Yeah, thank you very much for sharing that with us. And I think what you're demonstrating as well is something I really try to do as well. Is acknowledging our privileges and checking our privileges should not be a destructive thing. It should not be something to fear.
Mm-hmm.
It should be something to embrace. And my experience is I've mirrored yours very much. yes, I have certain barriers put in front of me, being transgender, but and being not straight. But also, I do have the privileges of being white, of having gone through the education system, having gone to university, being a homeowner, and being mobile and things like that. And yes, I'm neurodivergent, but physically, I am able to go out and do things. So that does. I don't fear that. I acknowledge it, and I try and pay it forward. And I try and step aside for people who don't have the same voice that I do. And the other thing as well is that I want to say, firstly, you're amazing, right? It's the first thing I want to say. And the second thing is, folks who are listening, what I think you've done for some teachers, maybe even to some students listening, who feel that geography is not accessible for them because of that stereotype you said. You've got to be fit, you've got to be healthy, you're going to go out on hikes and walks, you've got to be able to do 10 miles a day, you've got to you've got to be this very masculine. Yeah, that is a barrier. For that perception is a barrier to people. And educator folks, I mean, a lot of people listening to this know me very well. They know where I'm coming from. But folks, we have to think of these things when we're portraying our subject, our discipline of geography. How are we coming across? And Hilary is a perfect example of barriers have been put in place, but she can still not only contribute, but really move things forward as well, despite the barriers in her place. And that's like what I said, when her PhD research comes out, it's going to be so valuable. It's going to be amazing, right? And if Hilary'd never had that opportunity because of the barriers put in her place, it's no benefit to anybody. It lets everybody
down. Thank you so much. That's such a lovely thing to say, Kit. Thank you.
Well, one thing people know about me is that I talk from I wear my sleeve on my heart, and I'm honest. So that is an absolute genuine sentiment, Hilary. So please, folks, if you've got students in your classroom who are feeling that there are barriers in place, if you can just play the segment that you just heard, that would be amazing. Thank you so much. So should we move on to make it a bit of fun out of you now, shall we?
Let's do it. I'm ready.
Yeah. So for our Spill the Bean segment, you put here that for a geographer, you are terrible at strategy board games that involve space and moving pieces around the board. For example, you'll never understand the Settlers of Catan. I hate that game as well. You know what? I'm also terrible at? I'm terrible at Risk. I get pummeled at Risk every single time. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to combine your fear of strategy board games and your love of Lord of the Rings. So what I'm going to do...
I mean, it sounds intriguing, yeah.
So what I've done, right, is that I've found... this is the Lord of the Rings, lotr.fandom.com. So basically the one wiki to rule them all website.
All right.
I love that recognition. Right. And what I've done, I've gone to the battles category page. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to give you 5 battles, and we're going to play, this is a cross between Spill the Beans and Jog On, which is where you get to talk about 3 of them, and we'll see if we got your knowledge about them. I'll try to be nice, and that these are ones that you can probably talk about. So the way this works, Hilary, is that you can pass on 2, but you must talk about 3 of the 5, right? And if you want to talk about it, you say jog on. And if you don't want to talk about it, you say take a hike. That's my way of trying to be quirky. Right. Okay, well, let's start. So the first one I've got on my list is one that you probably are quite familiar with, actually. So you might want to jog on with this one. And that is the Battle of the 5 Armies.
Sure.
You jogging on? Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Jog on. Yeah.
Okay, good. So tell us about the Battle of Five, and if you could talk about the strategies involved as well.
Sure. I will say this. I am not a fan of the Hobbit movies. So
no, a lot of people are not.
So I'm just going to put that out there. But I haven't read The Hobbit as much as I should have, but I will try. So Thorin and company have built a wall, and basically everyone is holding a siege outside of the gates of their fortress in the Lonely Mountain. And I think that the 5 armies referred to, so I know that the Elven King brings his army. Mm-hmm. I know that there's orcs, goblins. I think it's called goblins in The Hobbit, actually, that show up. I know that there's Dane Ironfoot and his army.
Oh, well remembered. Yep.
And then I believe that there's an army led by Bard from the Lake Town, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But then my question is, what's the fifth army? Is maybe Thorin's group called the fifth army? There's only 13 of them.
So you had
seems
Thranduil, and you had
right
here as well. So
the Eagles is one. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. So Thranduil is the Elven King, which is why he's called the Elven King in The Hobbit. So hat tip to the lore folk there. Yep. All right. 4 out of 5, pretty good.
Yeah, right. So you know what I love about wikis are how detailed they are, right? This is the strength of so first of all, the strength of the 5 armies, right? 1,000 elf spearmen and several hundred of the archers of the woodland realm, at least 500 dwarves of the Iron Hills, 200, 300 lake men, several hundred great eagles, 1 beorning, and I love this.
Oh, sure.
1 hobbit. 1 hobbit. Bilbo, bless him. And on the other side, it just says innumerable orcs, backs, and wogs.
Yeah, I was thinking about the bats too. I was thinking I forgot to mention them in my count.
Yeah, because they were battling with the eagles. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Perfect. Battle of the 5 armies, which is basically the whole of the 3rd movie of The Hobbit.
It is. Yeah. Peter Jackson really stretched that out. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So the next one is the battles of the Fords of Isen. You're going to talk about that one? You can talk about this one, or do you want to pass?
I think I want to pass that.
Okay.
I'm not sure how expansive they're thinking with that one.
Okay, so this is when the Rohirrim and the Uruk-hai clashed with Theodred. Because I think was that when Prince Theodred was killed, I think. Spoiler.
I think fell, yeah. I think he technically died at the Golden Hall, right?
Yeah.
I don't know.
He was brought home injured, yeah. Okay, so we're skipping that one. Let's see. What was the other one I got here? Oh, yes. So, I don't know if you know this one. The skirmish at Amon Hen.
Yeah, sure.
You can talk about okay, yeah.
Yeah, so what do I say? Trot on? No.
Jog on.
Jog on. Trot. So Amon Hen is when Aragorn leads the Fellowship minus Gandalf down the Great River, and they are headed for Emyn Muil to get into Mordor, but they stop to spend the night at Amon Hen and then cross the river in darkness. So all the members of the Fellowship are there except for Gandalf, and little do they know that they have been tracked this whole time by Saruman's Uruk-hai. And so then they get into a battle with them there. I think there's 100 of them, or I don't know the numbers. I have to admit I'm not that
the
intense.
The wiki just says many.
Many. Okay, I should have just gone with that. Just show confidence, never show weakness, right? So many Uruk-hai. And so unfortunately the outcome of that is that Boromir sacrifices himself to save Merry and Pippin. Yeah. Which was totally worth it. Totally worth it.
Absolutely. Oh my God. Huge Merry and Pippin Sean Bean absolutely nails it. Absolutely nails it. Because you go from hating the bloke to oh no, Boromir! So it's exactly as you said. So that was when there was a skirmish there. Boromir, it said, and I love the outcome, the way they've written the outcome. So conflict, War of the Ring, date February 26, 3019, place at Amon Hen. Outcome, tactical victory for Isengard, strategic failure apparently for Isengard. Because of course it led to the breakup of the Fellowship, which actually worked in Frodo and Sam's favour. So that's why I'm guessing it was deemed a strategic failure. Right.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll be on the 4th one. I had to have this one, the Battle of the Hornburg.
Oh yeah, that's my favorite. Yeah. Definitely jog on. So so differently to the movie.
Yes.
The rescuer is actually Erkenbrand, who comes with the men of Westfold, I think that's right.
Yeah.
To the rescue of Legolas, Gimli, Aragorn, Theoden, etc., the entire household, all the Rohirrim that were there. And I think that was like something like 10,000 Urukai versus like a
Yeah.
few hundred within the Hornburg, the fortress. And so that's like a rousing victory for mankind, for the good guys, I would
Yep.
say. And then I feel like I'm narrating an audiobook at this point. So then once the good guys win, once Erkenbrand shows up, and they're not on horses, they're on foot, which makes it even more impressive. They walked for like 4 days to get there or something. The Huorns, who
Yes.
are a like violent species of Ent, not totally clear on that. Some subspecies, but more vengeful, perhaps, more hasty, you might say. The Huorns
Let's
show
not
up.
be hasty.
Exactly. The Huorns show up, and then the fleeing Urukai get eaten by the Huorns, which is amazing.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, how'd I do on that one?
Oh, that was amazing. I'll tell you what, though, that was absolutely brilliant for that bit, because you've that was one of my favorite parts of that movie is just at the very end when they're all running away, and then you just see the trees just and then you hear
the dismembering occurs.
Dismembering of the occurs. Like, it was too graphic to actually see that, but I had it right. Well, great. So the fifth one, which I had, so obviously we was going to skip because you've had your three, unfortunately, was the battle of the Pelargir, which is when I think when the army of the dead comes over and takes over the all the pirate ships of Umbar.
That's kind of a niche one, though. That would have been fun to pull that one out of my sleeve. Yeah,
right. Okay, folks, so because Hilary did that so well, I'm going to keep my promise. Right. So I don't believe I'm going to do this. I'm going to introduce the last segment of the podcast as Gollum.
Yes, give the people what they want.
Well, I promised you, and you did that so well. Right, okay. Here we go. Okay, well, the false and tricksy Hilary has tricked me into doing this stupid hobbit. Sorry, folks, sorry. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we are all geographers. Yes, precious. No, we're not. Who wants to do that stupid thing that Kit's come up with? Come on. Not listening. So, Hilary, what we got? My throat's giving out now. I can't do it anymore.
Bravo, that was amazing. Right. Andy Serkis would be just that was phenomenal.
I'm coming at you, Andy. I'm coming at you. Right. Okay. So what we geographers is when each guest comes up with a word for the next guest to talk about for 30 seconds. Okay. So, and you can relate it to geography or your work, or you could just opine for 30 seconds. So Jessica Law, our last guest from last week, came up with the word glide for you. So, I mean, if you want to talk about the Eagles and all the rings and gliding, that's fine. But no, so Hilary, yeah. So for 30 seconds, it's just absolutely riffing on the word glide. So,
my first thought, this is so funny, is there's a brand of floss in the United States called Glide.
Yes,
and that is
my
first thought. It's very unpoetic, incredibly practical. It also makes me think of hang gliding, which I did. Yeah, so I did go hang gliding once, actually, and that was incredible. I'm trying to think if it has any connection to geography. It was spring break, senior year of high school. Well, I guess the place it takes, where it took place was pretty interesting geographically. So it happened in the Outer Banks of North Carolina, which are a series of barrier islands that are kind of connected by, thin strips and now highways to the mainland. And they're, one of the first places that's battered by hurricanes that come to that region. And so that's kind of an amazing place, actually, geographically. I mean, it's just, you can literally see from one side to the other. It's so narrow.
Yeah.
Kind of a scary place to hang glide, actually, for that matter. Lots of water. Yeah. But anyway, really cool place. And that's actually where planes were invented. And if we didn't have planes, we wouldn't have remote sensing, we wouldn't have GIS, we wouldn't have satellites, and we probably wouldn't have geography as we know it in the modern day.
Oh, lovely. I tell you what, I forgot to set my timer, and I don't care, because that worked perfectly. I love how you weaved it in. Yeah. If we didn't, yeah. Okay. Your Kitty Hawk. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you have now the pleasure of giving our next guest a word that they have to talk about at the end of the episode.
You know, I thought about this ahead of time, and everything that came to mind was way too easy. So I looked around my house for a household object, and I have one.
Go for it.
Toaster.
Yes. That
it's a real stumper, isn't it?
That reminds me of yeah, one I did. I've forgotten who came up with it now. It might have been Jess Tipton who came up with trampoline.
Oh, nice.
But the next person nailed it, because they talked about, the materials of the trampoline. I was like, oh, okay, no, you can't.
Okay, fair.
But yeah, we're going to go with toaster.
Chains.
Yeah, we're going to go with toaster. And this has been lovely, Hilary. Thank you so much. So yeah, have you got anybody you'd like to say hi to or give a shout out to?
Oh gosh. Well, I think I would just give a shout out to all the geography teachers who are listening, to say how grateful I am and how much we need teachers right now. How much I wish I had been in one of their classrooms myself as a young learner. But truly none of the research we do, none of the academia stuff that I do would be important at all if it weren't for those folks. So I'm really appreciative of those people and the fact that they're listening and using that time to listen to this. And I'm thankful for you for doing the podcast and for inviting me.
It's when I have people like you come on, well, every single one of my guests just brings joy to my life and opens my eyes that tiny bit more. And, as someone who is, I'm getting older now, but as someone who is able-bodied and stuff like that, it, again, another privilege check for me today. And thank you so much for bringing that to me, for enhancing my worldview and my life for that. That's just so beautiful, Hilary. Thank you.
Thank you, Kit.
Please make sure, Hilary, we keep in touch, because I certainly want to make sure that, the work that you're doing, that it gets on geography teachers' radars. And in that spirit, I'd like you to tell us where we can find you, because I know that I'm hoping that when this episode goes live, hopefully you're going to get a few upticks in the follow account, because your Twitter account is...
My Twitter is my first name, Hilary, Hilary H. Hunt. So Hilary H. Hunt on Twitter. So please come be friends. I'd love to meet you all. Please, folks.
Wonderful human being. And if you just search for Hilary Habeck Hunt as well, University of Wisconsin, you can, as with all the academic PhD students, you can get the profile and what they're studying and stuff like that. Hilary, I've really, really enjoyed this. Thank you so much for giving up your afternoon to talk to us. And please do keep in touch. Please do keep in touch.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for making this possible and for inviting me. It's such a joy.
Cool. Thank you so much for listening. We hope you had fun. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe so more stories and experiences can drop into your favourite podcast app. If you fancy being a guest or have any feedback, follow us on Twitter at coffeegeogpod and send us a DM. Or you could email coffeeandgeog@geogramblings.com. Until next time, keep geogging.